first contact with an alien species was humanity's chance for a new beginning. But everything changed the moment they saw our war history. What if Earth's violent past is too dangerous for the galaxy to ignore? When the aliens judge us, not for our future, but for our darkest chapters, the stakes couldn't be higher. In this high-stakes tale of diplomacy and fear, humanity must face its greatest test, prove we've evolved, or risk being cast aside by the stars forever. Will we rise above our history, or will our past condemn us to the void? At first, they thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the satellite sensors, or some natural phenomenon misinterpreted by a dozen different monitoring systems. But when the object passed into Earth's atmosphere, the world stood still. A single sleek vessel, its edges gleaming like silver in the sun, cast a shadow across the planet, silently descending from the stars. The world had been expecting something. No one could have predicted when or how, but every nation knew it was coming. The first contact with an intelligent species beyond Earth. For decades, humanity had prepared for this moment. With cryptic messages intercepted from distant stars, hopeful whispers from astronomers, and classified reports hinting that the day would come when the skies opened up. Yet, no one was ready for the arrival to be this effortless, this silent. The United Nations convened within minutes, scrambling to coordinate an international response. The alien ship had already been tracked, its descent timed and calculated. It was headed straight for the United States, landing in a vast stretch of uninhabited desert. No military escalation, no sudden maneuvers, just a single, confident arrival. The White House responded quickly. President Katherine Hawthorne, whose first term had been marked by an unprecedented surge in global diplomacy, addressed the nation. Her calm, measured voice soothed the anxiety of the masses who were glued to their screens, waiting for some kind of confirmation, some sign of what was to come. "We stand on the edge of a new chapter for humanity," she began. "Today, we encounter the unknown. Our first steps will be careful, our hearts open. Let us show the world what Earth can offer." Meanwhile, military officials buzzed with tension, hidden behind closed doors. The world security apparatus, already on edge from previous years of escalating tensions and geopolitical shifts, had been bracing for a more aggressive scenario. But this was different. The ship's unassuming entrance, the lack of any obvious weaponry or aggressive posturing, made it clear that humanity's worst fears weren't being realized. Still, the questions remained. Who were they? Why Earth? And, perhaps most unsettling of all, what did they want? The alien delegation touched down in the Nevada desert at precisely 3:47 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Military drones, quietly dispatched to monitor the area, hovered at the edges of the dust cloud kicked up by the landing. No one moved for several long minutes. No one could move. Not the officials, not the military, and certainly not the media, which had been given strict orders to stay out of the restricted zone. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the gleaming vessel. It was humanoid in shape, but its proportions were subtlety off, too tall, too thin. The skin appeared iridescent, shifting colors with every movement. Its face was not entirely like a human's, but possessed a sharp elegance, an intelligence that radiated far beyond Earth's understanding. Two more figures followed, shorter, but no less imposing, their expressions unreadable. The humans watching from the perimeter could do nothing but stare in stunned silence as these beings, who had traveled millions of light years to meet Earth's representatives, approached the carefully established contact point. A few seconds passed. Then the air was filled with words. Not in English. Not in any known language. Yet, through some method that could not be explained by the scientific community later, the message was instantly translated. "We come in peace," the voice said, as if the phrase were carved into the very air itself. "We offer knowledge, technology, and alliance. Join us, and we shall raise your civilization to heights beyond your imagining." There was a collective intake of breath from those who had been listening. It was simple. It was direct. And in that moment, the idea of peace, uncontested, unchallenged, seemed like the most extraordinary thing to ever happen to humanity. It was the moment that humanity had longed for, and yet something about it felt off. In the distance, on the edge of the desert, a group of military generals met with their closest advisors, their fingers trembling over their wrist communicators. The aliens might have made their peaceful intentions clear, but the question that haunted everyone's minds was whether they truly understood humanity, all of humanity. The days that followed the aliens' arrival felt like a delicate dance, careful, precise, and loaded with unspoken tension. While the world watched in awe as the aliens unveiled their intentions of peace, there was something unshakable in the air, a sense that this moment, as historic as it was not quite what it appeared. Humanity had waited for first contact for centuries. The thought that the stars might one day reach down to touch Earth had been a dream for many. But now, as alien ships hovered silently over the planet, as their emissaries offered their hands in peace, it became clear that peace was a fragile thing. And humanity's scars, written deep into the annals of history, could never be erased by mere words. At the United Nations headquarters, diplomats were already at work drafting responses, carefully balancing openness with caution. The words from the aliens' mouthpiece rang through every meeting. We offer knowledge, technology, and alliance. No one could deny that the gifts they offered were vast. Energy sources that could power the world for millennia, cures for diseases long thought incurable, technologies that would revolutionize humanity's understanding of physics, biology, and space. Yet, despite the allure of such a future, a darker undercurrent stirred among the world's leaders. Do we trust them? President Hawthorne asked, standing before a wall of holographic maps and data projections. The entire world watched her, the weight of that question hanging in the air. Her diplomatic team was split. Some saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance to take humanity's place in the cosmos, while others felt uneasy. Hadn't the past shown the dangers of unchecked trust? Hadn't the history of Earth, from the colonization of nations to the tensions of the Cold War, been built on a foundation of suspicion and fear? Ambassador Karen Fielding, a seasoned diplomat who had spent her career navigating the complexities of intergovernmental negotiations, spoke carefully. We don't know enough about them yet. We can't afford to let this be another moment of rash decision-making. What do we know about their true intentions? That question hung in the air for a long time. What did they know? How could humanity possibly know anything about this alien species? All that had been revealed was that they had the power to shape the course of human history, and that they wanted to share it. But what could they possibly want in return? Meanwhile, as the political leaders scrambled to make decisions, an entirely different conversation was happening in secret. Military leaders across the globe convened in shadowed rooms, far from the prying eyes of diplomats. There were no assurances here, no promises of utopia. Only cold calculations. General Michael Donovan, a career soldier with decades of experience in the highest echelons of military strategy, was skeptical. We can't just give them the benefit of the doubt. Peaceful visitors don't come to Earth after we've spent centuries amassing weapons capable of destroying entire planets. There's something here we don't understand yet. There was a murmur of agreement from the officers seated around the table. Some had lived through the height of the Cold War. Others had seen the flash of conflict on distant battlefields. Every one of them knew that history was written in blood, and that peace, though desirable, was fragile. The aliens' promises of peace might be genuine, but they also understood the reality of power. If they had the capability to offer humanity such unimaginable gifts, could it also be true that they held something more, something dangerous? On the surface, Earth's response appeared to be one of unity, but beneath the calm facade was a simmering anxiety. The nations of the world had not forgotten the lessons of the past, not entirely. They understood that power could be wielded in many ways. If the aliens wanted something, what would they ask of humanity in return? And what did their peaceful message truly mean when weighed against the history of war that had shaped Earth? In private, President Hawthorne spoke again, but this time it was to a select few. We need to know more. The war histories, they might hold the answers. Her voice was low, filled with uncertainty. We cannot afford to be naive. Not now. But the more they looked into Earth's own past, the unending cycle of conflict that had shaped every civilization, the more the diplomatic team began to wonder. Could the aliens truly accept humanity's violent history? Or was the promise of peace a veil that concealed something far darker? And in the midst of it all, the alien emissaries continued their quiet presence, waiting, observing. The world was moving toward a choice it could not yet fully comprehend. A choice that could either elevate humanity to a new era or unravel it at the seams. The question was no longer whether Earth was ready for the future. It was whether the future was ready for Earth. The moment humanity shared its war history with the alien delegation, everything changed. What had started as a peaceful exchange of knowledge and goodwill now felt like a moment of judgment. The first few days had been full of promise, a dream for the future that seemed too perfect to question. But as the aliens delved deeper into Earth's history, their demeanor shifted subtly, and a growing tension seeped into every conversation, every interaction. It began innocuously enough. The aliens had requested to see Earth's war history, not to study specific battles or military strategies, but to understand the soul of humanity's past, a request that, at first, seemed entirely reasonable. After all, the species' most advanced representatives would need to understand the full scope of Earth's evolution before proposing an alliance. At the United Nations, the digital archives were made available to the alien delegation. Unfiltered and complete, every war, every conflict, every struggle, spanning millennia, was at their disposal. The records were presented with the same seriousness as any other diplomatic document. Battles of empires long gone, the rise and fall of monarchs, the cold wars that had nearly destroyed the planet, the scorched earth of modern conflicts. All the pain, all the bloodshed, the endless cycle of violence that humanity had tried to move past. What the aliens saw was not just history. It was a mirror showing a species that had been forged by war and conflict, a species that had fought for survival on a scale so vast it seemed incomprehensible. They watched the rise of global powers, the spread of ideologies, the bloody struggles for dominance that had shaped the world order. But they also saw something else. The aliens, it seemed, were not just curious, they were appalled. When the first full-day meeting concluded, the diplomats in charge of liaising with the alien delegation noticed a shift. The emissaries were not hostile, but their expressionless faces had grown more distant. They no longer exuded the warmth they had shown when they first arrived. The kind, curious eyes that had studied humanity with wonder were now calculating, unreadable. Ambassador Karen Fielding was the first to notice the change. She had spent her life observing people, understanding motives and intentions. She had seen how power could shift in a room, how a single piece of information could change everything. But it was something different. The aliens were still polite, still respectful, but the underlying tension was palpable. When the delegation made its way back to the United Nations the following day, their demeanor was cold, almost clinical. They had processed the data, and now the questions began. "You have a history of destruction," one of the alien representatives stated flatly, its voice devoid of emotion. "You were once capable of unthinkable violence. Even now, your weapons can annihilate entire cities, entire populations." The room fell silent. The diplomats exchanged uneasy glances. The alien words hung in the air like a weight. Fielding spoke, attempting to maintain the fragile peace. That's part of our history, yes. But we've evolved. We're no longer a species of constant conflict. We've worked hard to transcend that." The alien regarded her silently for a moment before responding. And yet your people still cling to the power of violence. Why? Why do you continue to hold on to the ability to destroy? There was no answer, not immediately. How could there be? Humanity's history was riddled with contradictions. The human race had forged its identity in the furnace of conflict. It had emerged from centuries of warfare, brutality, and fear, only to build societies that still relied on military power for protection and control. No matter how far Earth advanced, the shadow of war was never truly gone. Ambassador Fielding tried to steer the conversation back to more neutral ground, but the damage had been done. The aliens no longer looked at humanity with the same regard they once had. There was something else now, something darker, more cautious, as if they had come to a conclusion about Earth that made them hesitate, if only for a moment. We have seen the histories. The alien leader spoke again, its tone laced with a quiet edge. And we do not understand. How can you as a species be trusted with the knowledge we offer, when your past is so brutal? The question hung in the air, unanswered. As the meeting ended and the alien delegation withdrew, the diplomats sat in stunned silence. They had known Earth's history was complex, but the reaction from the aliens had been unexpected. The world had been offered a choice: peace, knowledge, and a future among the stars. But the price for that peace, an unspoken condition, perhaps, seemed far steeper than anyone had imagined. Now, the world was on the verge of a decision. The aliens had shown their hand, but had humanity shown enough of its own? Could Earth prove it was more than just its violent past? Or would this be the moment that doomed humanity's future before it had even begun? The days following the aliens' reaction to Earth's war history were tense, as if the entire world was holding its breath. What had started as a hopeful encounter had quickly turned into something else, something more complicated. The alien emissaries no longer spoke of peace in the same open manner. There was no longer talk of alliance, only cold, analytical observations and questions about humanity's fitness to be part of a galactic community. Humanity, for its part, tried to make sense of the shift. Politicians and military leaders scrambled to assess the situation, each with a different perspective. Some believed that the aliens had simply needed time to process what they had seen. After all, their culture had likely evolved far beyond the conflicts that had plagued Earth for centuries. Others feared that the aliens' change in behavior signaled something darker, that humanity was being judged and found wanting. President Hawthorne spent countless hours in meetings with advisors, attempting to gauge the mood of both the alien delegation and the global population. The media, which had once celebrated the arrival of the aliens as a historic moment of unity and hope, was now filled with rumors and speculation. Was Earth's violent history truly so unforgivable? Was humanity's place in the galaxy truly in jeopardy? Could the peaceful alliance that had seemed so likely be crumbling before it even began? The tension reached a boiling point when the alien delegation issued a statement, one that felt as much like a warning as an invitation. The message was transmitted to the United Nations and made public. Humanity must confront its own darkness. We are willing to offer assistance, but only if you prove that you can transcend your violent history. We will not risk offering our knowledge and technology to a species that remains incapable of controlling its own destructive impulses. The words hung over Earth like a dark cloud. Military experts immediately took notice. General Michael Donovan, still reeling from the earlier diplomatic meeting, was one of the first to voice his concerns. What if this isn't just about understanding our history? What if this is a test? What if they're not here to help us, but to judge us, to see if we're worthy of the gifts they offer? Fielding, the diplomat who had worked tirelessly to maintain peace, disagreed. We can't think of this as a rejection. They've seen our past, yes, but they're not condemning us outright. They're giving us a chance, a choice. They want us to prove we can be more than our past. Donovan didn't share her optimism. And what happens if we fail that test? We've built too much of our society around the idea that force and power are the ultimate guarantors of peace. If they don't think we can evolve past that, we could lose everything. As the days wore on, more unsettling information came to light. The aliens, in their quest to understand humanity, had begun scanning Earth's current weaponry, its military capacity. They examined the vast arsenal of nuclear weapons still scattered across the globe, the advanced warfare technologies that many countries kept hidden, and the military-industrial complex that continued to thrive despite humanity's claims of peace. What they found was a species caught between two worlds. On one hand, Earth's governments had committed to disarmament treaties, established international organizations to promote peace, and taken steps to prevent further global conflict. But on the other, they still maintained vast arsenals of weaponry, continually developing new forms of destruction in the name of national security. It was clear to the aliens that humanity had the potential for both creation and annihilation, a paradox that made them hesitant to trust Earth's desire for peace. If Earth could build weapons that could wipe out entire civilizations, could it be trusted with knowledge so powerful it could change the fabric of the galaxy itself? At the same time, the diplomats tried to salvage what little goodwill remained. "They've given us a path forward," Fielding said, her voice urgent in private discussions. "It's not too late. If we show them that we can change, that we are committed to a peaceful future, they will see us differently." But not everyone shared her belief. Military leaders, watching closely as the aliens studied Earth's capacity for violence, saw only a species still clinging to the weapons of its past. And they feared that the aliens, having seen this, would decide that Earth was too dangerous to be allowed to progress. The clock was ticking. Humanity's fate was now in its hands. Could it convince the aliens that it had outgrown its violent tendencies? Or would the history of war and destruction that had shaped Earth's civilization be its undoing? In the quiet chambers of the United Nations, the diplomats, military leaders, and heads of state deliberated, knowing that the next move, whether to embrace the challenge of change or defend Earth's right to its history, would decide the course of humanity's future. One thing was certain: the aliens were no longer just visitors from the stars. They were watchers, waiting to see if Earth had truly learned the lessons of its past, or if it was destined to repeat them once again. The tension in the air had reached a breaking point. Humanity's future in the stars now hung by the thinnest of threads. After the alien delegation's chilling warning, the world had split into factions, each with its own view of what humanity's next move should be. Some saw the aliens' demands for change as an opportunity, an unprecedented chance to evolve and step into the galactic community. Others, however, saw only a threat, a reminder that Earth's violent past could never truly be outrun. Behind the scenes, political leaders were grappling with a decision that could alter the course of human history. In Washington, President Hawthorne convened an emergency session with her closest advisors, military strategists, and diplomats. The question was no longer simply whether humanity could make peace with the aliens. It was whether humanity could change, and if so, how quickly. General Michael Donovan, his face etched with concern, stood at the front of the room. "We're looking at two choices. We can try to change, to embrace the idea of peace, something we've never truly done before. Or we can take the risk of losing everything and prepare for the worst-case scenario." Fielding, the diplomat who had been one of the few to maintain optimism throughout the crisis, spoke up. "It's not about change for the sake of change. It's about showing the aliens that we can rise above our past mistakes, that we are capable of more than just destruction. We can't let fear dictate our choices." But Donovan's skepticism was hard to quell. It's easy to say that when you're not the one facing the potential consequences of failure. If we show any sign of weakness, if we fail this test of peace, we may never have another chance at an alliance. As the debate raged on, a smaller, more radical faction within the global military began to make its presence felt. They were not the ones drafting peaceful treaties or attending diplomatic talks. Instead, they were the ones quietly assembling contingency plans, preparing for a possible military confrontation should the aliens decide Earth was too dangerous to be trusted with their advanced technology. The faction, led by a former military commander named Victor Koval, believed that the only way to secure humanity's future was to demonstrate its strength. The aliens had shown their power, their knowledge, but Earth had its own weapons, its own form of might. Koval's followers were willing to use those weapons if it meant protecting the sovereignty of Earth. While Koval and his supporters worked in the shadows, Fielding and the other diplomats struggled to maintain momentum. Publicly, the United Nations presented a united front, but behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to form. Every country had its own interests, its own agendas, and some were already entertaining the idea that perhaps humanity didn't need the aliens after all. The promises of technology and knowledge were enticing, but some feared that dependence on these outsiders would leave Earth vulnerable. In a private meeting, President Hawthorne addressed her team. "We're at a crossroads," she said, her voice steady but strained. "If we turn our backs on this opportunity, if we show the aliens that we're unwilling to change, they may decide we're too dangerous to ever interact with again. But if we take the first step, if we show them we can change, we might secure a future that far exceeds anything we could have imagined." Her words echoed the sentiments of many, but there was no clear path forward. The military's readiness for conflict, the increasing division between nations, and the ever-present fear that Earth was simply too volatile to be trusted, all combined into an unbearable weight. The world was teetering on the edge of a decision, and no one knew which direction it would fall. Then came the unexpected. The alien emissaries, who had remained mostly silent since their last cold exchange, requested another meeting with President Hawthorne and the leaders of the United Nations. There was no explanation, no forewarning. They simply asked to speak again. When the diplomats and military leaders gathered once more in the United Nations chamber, the aliens' representative spoke with a quiet authority that made everyone pause. "We have observed your species for some time," the alien said. "Your history, your conflicts, your violence. But we have also seen something else. We have seen the capacity for change. Your greatest strength is not in your power to destroy. It is in your ability to rise from the ashes of your past. We offer you this one final chance to prove that you have learned." The message was clear. The choice was no longer in the aliens' hands. Humanity had the opportunity to prove itself, whether it would rise to the challenge or remain bound by the destructive cycles of its past. As the meeting ended and the aliens departed, a heavy silence descended upon the room. The diplomats, military leaders, and world leaders knew that this was it. Humanity's future, its place in the galaxy, would be determined by the choices made in the coming weeks. Could Earth prove to the aliens that it was ready for peace? Could it transcend the violence that had defined its past, or would it fall back into the same old patterns of fear and destruction? The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The final decision would not just shape Earth's future. It would determine whether humanity would ever have a place among the stars. The meeting with the aliens had been unsettling, leaving humanity with a heavy sense of impending consequence. There was no longer any room for missteps, no further opportunities to fumble through diplomacy or delay a decision. The aliens had made their final offer, and now the ball was in humanity's court. The question that loomed over the world was simple, yet staggeringly complex. Could humanity prove that it had transcended its violent past? The response came quickly, but not in the way many had anticipated. In the days that followed the alien emissary's final declaration, Earth's political leaders and military strategists met in secret to discuss a single, undeniable truth. Humanity's future was no longer a question of mere survival. It was about identity, about proving to the galaxy that Earth could change, that its future could be written in a different language, one that was no longer defined by war. President Hawthorne, more resolute than ever, convened a summit that brought together the world's greatest minds. Scientists, philosophers, military leaders, diplomats, and even artists, the people who had been responsible for shaping Earth's cultural fabric, were gathered to discuss the unthinkable. What would it take for humanity to cast aside its violent history and demonstrate its readiness for the stars? For many, the answer seemed clear. It was time for a universal, global disarmament. The world would come together to dismantle its weapons, not just as a gesture of peace to the aliens, but as a commitment to a future where power was measured in unity and knowledge, not destruction. The proposal was revolutionary, and it was met with swift opposition from those who felt that the world was simply too fragile, too vulnerable, to relinquish its military might. The military-industrial complex had been the backbone of many nations, and to strip away those defenses would be seen as an act of weakness, even treason. National leaders, facing pressure from their constituents and military elites, hesitated to make such a monumental shift. But it wasn't just the politicians and generals who felt the weight of this decision. Across the globe, people watched the developments unfold with a sense of both hope and fear. On one hand, the idea of a peaceful, united world was the dream many had worked for their entire lives. On the other, what if that dream made them vulnerable? What if disarmament meant humanity was unprepared for threats, not from the stars, but from each other? The alien emissaries, meanwhile, waited in the background, offering no further guidance, only silence. They had made their stance clear. Humanity was at a crossroads, and they would not intervene. The future of Earth was now entirely in its own hands. As tension simmered, the world's leaders continued to deliberate. Some countries, such as those that had long been committed to peace and disarmament, moved forward with the proposal, while others dug in their heels, unwilling to give up their power. The divisions ran deep, but there was one thing everyone knew for certain. Any resolution to this crisis would have to be universal, or else it would mean nothing. The breakthrough came not from the politicians or the military strategists, but from an unexpected source: the people. Across the globe, protests began to mount in cities, towns, and villages. People from all walks of life, from the poorest to the wealthiest, stood together with one unified message: if humanity is to change, we must change everything. The protests were not just about disarmament, but about a deeper shift in consciousness, a desire to move beyond the old patterns of fear and destruction that had marked humanity's history. The pressure became too great to ignore. National leaders, sensing the shift in public sentiment, began to reconcile with one another. Countries that had long been adversaries, locked in bitter rivalries, now found common ground. The call for disarmament became more than a political move. It became a symbol of hope, a symbol of humanity's capacity for transformation. President Hawthorne addressed the United Nations for the final time on the matter. "We stand at the precipice of a new era," she said, her voice unwavering. "For too long, we have defined ourselves by war, by conflict, by destruction. But we are not defined by our past. We are defined by what we choose to become. And today, we choose peace." The resolution was passed. The world's nations committed to a global disarmament agreement, dismantling their stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. The military assets that had once held the world in a grip of fear were now decommissioned, replaced by collaborative efforts in scientific advancement, environmental restoration, and cultural exchange. As the final pieces of the resolution were signed, humanity knew that it had not only passed a test, it had rewritten its destiny. The aliens had watched, waited, and in the silence that followed, their judgment was clear. Earth was ready. The path forward was uncertain, and the future remained a vast unknown. But humanity had made a choice. It had chosen to believe in its capacity for growth, to step out of the shadows of its past and reach for the stars. It had chosen peace, not as a fleeting moment, but as a fundamental part of its identity. The world, at last, was ready for what lay beyond the stars.